In the archives of forgotten tragedies, one file still aches with injustice. It's not about a war, but about a war within the mind. This is Cassandra, Princess of Troy. Her name has become a curse, synonymous with a truth no one wants to hear. But the story we've been told is a lie. Cassandra was not a mad prophetess. She was the first victim of divine gaslighting. We will deconstruct Apollo's curse, not as a simple spell, but as a sophisticated linguistic virus, designed to turn objective truth into incoherent ramblings. This is the architecture of a perfect manipulation. The gift of foresight remained intact, but the ability to communicate it was systematically destroyed. Imagine the horror of seeing your enemy's weapon of destruction, while every word of warning turns to ash in your mouth. This was the core mechanic of the curse. To Cassandra, she was speaking clear truth. To everyone else, she was just making noise. Apollo weaponized his own gift. He didn't just want her silenced. He wanted to create a permanent state of cognitive dissonance, a psychological prison with no escape. This silence was not accidental. It was reinforced by the power structures of Troy itself. Her family, the most powerful people in the city, labeled her accurate warnings as hysteria, an ancient term for invalidating a woman's voice. Analysis shows gender dynamics amplified the curse. A young woman, even a princess, speaking of war and disaster. To them, it was unthinkable. Apollo's curse made her a social outcast. Her words were seen as bad omens, and her presence an uncomfortable reminder of a future they refused to face. Does this pattern feel familiar? Modern whistleblowers face the same institutional silencing, despite having verifiable evidence of impending disasters. But the true agony wasn't external. It was the trauma of living in two timelines simultaneously, the peaceful present and the burning future. She was the only one who saw both, trapped between a serene reality and an inevitable truth. The physical toll was immense, trying to save a city that viewed your protective warnings as a form of verbal assault. It corroded her from the inside out. The external curse led to an internal fragmentation. Her mind could no longer distinguish its own voice from the weight of the inevitable. Every attempt to save was misinterpreted as an act of aggression. The curse didn't just warp her words, it warped her very intentions. Ultimately, it was the people of Troy who finalized Apollo's curse. They made a choice. They chose the comfort of lies over the discomfort of Cassandra's reality. The analysis shows that the loss of credibility is more damaging than the loss of life. It erases the victim's agency before the tragedy even strikes. The community's refusal to listen created a toxic feedback loop. Her desperation made her delivery more frantic, which made her easier to dismiss. They didn't just ignore the truth. They actively buried it under celebration and delusion. When the flames finally consumed Troy, it wasn't a victory for Cassandra's foresight. It was the ultimate validation of her pain. Their screams were the echoes of the warnings they chose not to hear. Even in the destruction, she found no release. Her truth had arrived too late, and the cost was everything. Cassandra's tragedy is not ancient history. It echoes in our global crises, where expert warnings are buried under political rhetoric and public apathy. The question this file poses isn't why nobody believed her. It's which Cassandras are we silencing in our own lives? Because, as history proves, the silence is always the precursor to a preventable catastrophe. It began with a promise, a gift from a god. Apollo, patron of truth and prophecy, offered Cassandra the ability to see the future. But the Greek gods did not give gifts. They made transactions, and the price he demanded was her. She refused. A mortal's brave act of defiance against a deity. But divine pride is a fragile thing. He could not take the gift back, so he corrupted it. The act of the curse wasn't a complex incantation. It was a brutal, symbolic act. The linguistic virus was implanted. From that moment on, the truth she spoke would be encoded as madness to all who heard it. The first test, a small, objective truth. The cup will fall, she says, and it fell. But not because she prophesied it. The servant heard a strange noise, was startled, and dropped it. The curse didn't just create disbelief. It created a false logic to dismiss the truth. As the prophecies grew larger, war, destruction, so did the societal response. They diagnosed her. They called it divine hysteria. This is how systematic silencing works. A false narrative is repeated until it becomes the accepted truth. Cassandra's truth never stood a chance. She wasn't just ignored. She was sonically erased from her own city's reality. A living ghost, screaming into the void. The agony of the witness went deeper. For her, the future wasn't an idea. It was a vivid memory of things that hadn't happened yet. There was no escape. Sleep offered no respite, only rehearsals for the catastrophe. When your words are stripped of meaning, you begin to question your own existence. This is the ultimate goal of gaslighting, to make the victim erase themselves. Ignoring her became an act of civic duty, protecting the city's optimism by exiling the bearer of bad news. To lose your city is a tragedy. To lose your voice is to lose your identity. To lose everyone's belief is to lose your soul. On their final night, the Trojans were drunk on the illusion of their invincibility. An illusion Cassandra tried to shatter, and they hated her for it. And then, the truth arrived. Not in words, but in steel and fire. There was no room left for misinterpretation. No room for denial. Only the brutal, naked truth in their final moments. They heard her, clearly, but it was too late. Analysis of the Cassandra case reveals a disturbing truth. Humans have an innate ability to reject a reality if it threatens their comfort. Apollo's curse simply exploited a pre-existing human psychological flaw. Our defense mechanism against cognitive dissonance. That God doesn't need to curse us anymore. We do it to ourselves, choosing our own filters and information bubbles. Her vindication was not a triumph. It was a tombstone. Every flame was a testament to her failure to save them. Even her legacy was tarnished by the curse. History remembers her, not as the warner, but as the faulty warning itself, symbol of madness, not truth. The final lesson from case file C113 is clear. The real monster in Cassandra's story was not a vengeful god, it was human complacency, our infinite capacity for choosing a comfortable lie over a difficult truth. Listen closely. You can still hear her. The curse infected every facet of Trojan life. Every disastrous decision, from Paris's romance to military strategy, was made against the background of her ignored screams. Systematic silence became physical imprisonment. They didn't just ignore her, they removed her from public view to protect their delusion. The psychological torture wasn't just for Cassandra. Apollo had turned all of Troy into a theater for his tragedy, and they were unwitting actors. Her knowledge could have saved them 100 times over. Each ignored prophecy wasn't just a missed tragedy, it was a discarded weapon. For others, the future was a concept. For Cassandra, it was a tangible burden, a physical presence she had to carry alone. This contrast was the core of the torture. The city's ability to maintain a facade of normalcy while their apocalypse was knocking. Even when a male, authoritative voice echoed her warning, the gods intervened. The gods sent a brutal message. Anyone who sided with Cassandra, through logic or prophecy, would be destroyed. This cemented the narrative that the horse was sacred and Cassandra was blasphemous. His death sealed Troy's fate. It turned their skepticism into a fanatical belief. They became co-executors of Apollo's curse, and then silence. Not the silence forced upon Cassandra, but the silence of a sleeping city, unaware it had welcomed death within its walls. The curse was lifted, not by magic, but by the undeniable truth of violence. Suddenly, everyone could hear the scream of truth, but now it was their own. What happens when you are right about something you never wanted to be right about? Vindication is just another word for total loss. This wasn't a punishment for Troy. It was a personal torture for one woman who said no. An entire city was sacrificed for a god's wounded pride. Even modern psychology can get it wrong. It places the burden on the messenger, not on those who refuse the message. The curse continues. We retell her story over and over, often for entertainment, without realizing we are reinforcing the original injustice. The Cassandra file proves that truth itself has no power. Its power comes from acceptance, and acceptance can be vetoed by those in authority. Breaking this curse in our own time doesn't require magic. It requires a conscious choice. The choice to recognize the Cassandras among us. The choice to listen, even when the truth makes us uncomfortable. Because every catastrophe has a moment when it is preventable. A moment when a single voice, if heard, could have changed everything. That is why case file C113 is never truly closed. It is a permanent warning. The question remains, will you listen? The final analysis shows that Apollo's curse and human apathy are two sides of the same coin. Both transform truth into irrelevant noise. There is a special kind of suffering in knowing, while others remain happy in their ignorance. It is the loneliness of knowledge in a world that rejects reality. The sanest person will look like the craziest. Humanity's most basic tool language had betrayed her. How can you build a bridge to another mind when your very bricks disintegrate? Even after every prophecy she made about Troy came true, the curse lingered. Past truth granted no credibility for future truth. Perhaps the most tragic moment was when she realized screaming in silence led to the same outcome, and she chose silence. History is littered with visionaries whose societies branded them as heretics or madmen. Our challenge today is even greater. We don't face silence, but noise. How does the voice of truth penetrate this chaos? The investigator's job is not just to find the truth. It is to learn how to recognize the signal in the noise. She is not a myth. She is a mirror, and what she reflects is up to us to see. The most comfortable lie is ultimately the most dangerous. It lulls us to sleep precisely when we need to be most awake. She offered them the keys to survival. They chose to remain in the prison of their own ignorance. When words fail, action is all that is left. But her actions too were misinterpreted through the lens of madness they had forced upon her. History is written by the survivors, but it is often haunted by the ghosts of those who tried to warn them. The cost of ignoring Cassandra wasn't just a city. It was stolen futures, unlived lives, and a lesson paid for in blood in the end. Truth does not require an audience to be true. It simply is, whether it is acknowledged or not. The fire was the proof. This tragedy shows the capriciousness of the gods. The fate of thousands could be decided by a petty grudge on Olympus, but the story survived. Distorted, misunderstood, but it survived. A reminder that even the most silenced voices can echo through the ages. It is easy to judge the Trojans from the safe distance of millennia. The harder question is, are we any braver than they were? For Cassandra, death was not a tragedy. It was the end of a life tortured by truth. It was the only release she would ever know. Apollo's curse may have died with her, but the idea of Cassandra became immortal. Our mission at the Mystery Files is to amplify these voices, to ensure their agony is not forgotten. Cassandra's story forces us to confront a fundamental choice. Do we want comfort, or do we want truth? Sometimes, it only takes one person to listen to start a change. There is no redemption for Troy. They made their choice, and history is their verdict. The loop can only be broken from the outside. By an act of empathy and intentional listening, she is still speaking. Through history, through art, through our own repeated mistakes. The most terrifying silence was not hers. It is ours when we choose to turn away. Silence.